Joe Jorgensen.
That was the perfect answer. Thank you.
And welcome everybody to the Libertarian Podcast review. Look, Keith Knight, you can see he's on the screen there. You've probably read the title. He is the most prepared podcast video host out there. So what better way? Have him come on the show with the least prepared. Keith, you've got an hour. You have the floor. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh my gosh! Don't give me that kind of green light. I'll either go blank or you'll just regret the topic that I choose. I love that intro, by the way. It brought me back to that. That was the Tim Pool conversation.
Yes.
Right. Yes. Yeah. That was a great one.
I every time I do it, and when people come on and don't know much about my show. By the way, I'm Tyler Yonke. We've got Keith Knight. I do Libertarian podcasts, Libertarian adjacent, whatever. I kind of review them. I like to have people come on, their hosts, and we talk about all that stuff. That is, every time I play that, the guest either smirks or I get a nice warm spot in my heart because it cracks me up. It's Michael Malice at his best. And the pause with the who? I don't know. Did you vote for Joe Jorgensen? By the way, you had a video, and we'll get into all your stuff here, but you did a video breaking down her website, her campaign, which I thought was very insightful. How did you feel about her whole process?
The process I thought was horrific. I think the entire campaign should be more or less ashamed. What we have is inherited rather, the philosophy of Frederick Bastiat, Lysander Spooner, Milton Friedman, and Hans Hoppe, and they're really excited about watering it down and not offending people. This is actually just a total difference in ideology with, I guess you could call them well-meaning people in the LP. It's not like, well, there's so many feds, about half of them are feds. No, it actually is just a bunch of people whose goal is to not offend anyone and to appear rather professional within the political realm. That's not at all how someone like me sees the LP. I see it as one of many tools to help people escape mind control and the cult of statism. So when I see someone like Joe Jorgensen, I guess I'll just tell you the story because I think a lot of people know it by now. I was trying to come up with, her Dave Rubin appearance. That was very weak.
Right.
Joe Rogan said that he voted for her. Somehow that wasn't arranged. I'm not sure what that story is, but it's probably for the best. At some point, bad publicity is worse than no publicity because it gets people to say, you know what, I've given those people a chance. I've listened to them and they really don't have anything interesting to say. She spoke at the LP convention in Arizona a couple weeks ago, and she came up before Dave Smith. Oh my God, the cure for insomnia that this woman is. It was just unbelievable. Dave gets up there, of course, and within 1 minute, the crowd is cheering in between each one of the statements. So I asked her two questions. I asked her, what was the biggest mistake of the campaign, or what was where was the biggest room for improvement that you would give advice to people in the next election? She goes, well, I think the logo, there was a lot of issues with that.
Oh, my.
And she had said that the logo was, she had also mentioned the preparedness of her speeches. She didn't say anything about the content of the speeches. And then I go, all right, here's one that you need to be able to knock out of the park if you are the LP presidential candidate. And I said, what is your elevator pitch to the left and your elevator pitch to the right? Because people aren't going to read Man, Economy, and State, much as I'd like them to. But how are you going to grab their attention? She goes, well, what I say to the right is if you look at government spending under Donald Trump, and I go, you've lost me already. I go, that is not what gets people's hearts into this thing. I mean, so many people loved Trump before and after he spent us into oblivion. Yeah. And that's the Ben Carson move, to memorize the numbers exactly as they are and threaten about how big they are. You're comparing infinities when you talk about trillions, so you're not really moving the needle. The worst part of the Jorgensen campaign, here it is. We had an article written for her. I shouldn't say we. There was someone who had an article written for her regarding the war in Yemen. It was going to be published in USA Today. What this person needed was their approval, the campaign's approval. 750 words on the war in Yemen. Biggest NAP violation of our time, probably, but biggest one since, I don't know, something like Rwanda. Just something ridiculously evil and totally inexcusable. And they the campaign never gave the okay. The one time they responded was, well, I thought that Syria was the biggest humanitarian crisis and not Yemen. And they never took the opportunity to talk about Yemen, one of the most evil things ever. So because they did not use the platform to unapologetically spread the message of voluntary exchange and self-ownership like someone like Walter Williams would, I would consider the campaign a total failure.
So a few things there. One, if they were really serious about, I can't believe it, getting themselves even in the USA Today, it would be, okay, I get you. You wrote this on Yemen. How about we do write it on Syria? And I would put my name to the Syrian debacle. I'm sure whoever they wrote it, Scott Horton, could easily have made that shift. So that's a little disturbing there. But okay, let's just back up. You made a few comments here. One is feds being in the LP. Now, I believe they did infiltrate in the early 70s, but do you think it's worth their time to still continue to do so now? And, we make jokes about this all the time, but is it even a viable issue?
Well, my whole thing was that there's an easy explanation for not being a Fed, which is they just have a different philosophy of what the purpose of the LP is, as opposed to someone like me. I have no clue what goes on.
Well, I'm
in
saying
their
it's
head.
kind of feckless, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in a sense. So what's the purpose in a sense?
Well, the purpose is to control the opposition and to control
Okay.
not just the narrative, but the counter narrative. So you could easily see why something like COINTELPRO would exist, the operation by the FBI in the 60s to infiltrate dozens of groups. And even in the 90s, there was something loosely referred to as PATCON, Patriot Conspiracy, where the FBI and the ATF infiltrated right-wing extremist groups. The biggest case was in Elohim City with a whistleblower from the ATF. Her name was Carol Howe. She had said that there were so many discussions about the Oklahoma City building, the Murrah building in Oklahoma City, that they were going to blow up, that she believed that it was actually an ATF operation. So what they do is they get people into these groups to allegedly get information. But what they do is they end up being the agent provocateurs in these groups. They don't just sit on the sidelines. An example recently would be the Gretchen Whitmer case.
Right.
Well, why would the FBI want to get in there? Well, because you need an enemy when you're going to be a stable regime. So if you just look at the Democrats right now, they have the House, the Senate, the executive, they have Hollywood, they have the media, K through 12 education, they have professors, they have universities, they have most corporate media will brag about diversity and equality. They don't brag about any, right-wing values. So why can't they usher in this great society that they've been telling us is just around the corner since the days of Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt, and Lyndon Johnson? Well, the reason is the Proud Boys and Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. And there is just so much race that we underestimated how much white supremacy there was. Really, it's our fault. We were wrong about how evil you people are. This is what is allegedly stopping some of the most powerful people. And then the fakest fake I think I've ever seen was this Patriot Front. Have you seen this on Twitter?
Yes. Yeah.
That is so bad that even if it's real, it's a few dozen people who have no institutional power. They have the most powerful people in the world, and Gavin McGinnis's Proud Boys are stopping them from giving us economic prosperity. It's so ridiculous. So that's why the FBI would do it. That's why any organization would do it, to create an enemy that explains why they haven't achieved their goals and why they need more money and more power.
Okay, excellent. Then now, people out there, you just heard Keith rattle off a bunch of this stuff. This is huge info. He does this all in his videos. So I do want to come back to the what is it, Patriot Front. I want to talk about them, but let's back up just a little bit and find out about you. So Keith Knight, I know here's where you first came on my radar. Dave Smith, everyone knows Dave Smith, or they seemingly do. And you appeared on his show, and it was awesome, by the way. It was a great conversation. Learned a lot about you. I went right to your website or your YouTube page, subscribed. And then I went down the rabbit hole that you provide, which is a lot of stuff. Michael Schumer, Pasio, Larkin Rose, you've introduced me to these people, and then a lot of your clips and stuff. How did you, first of all, how old are you? Let's start with real simple questions.
25.
25. Okay.
And
I only laugh.
When you say Michael, did you mean Michael Humer?
Humer. I'm not Schumer. No, right.
Okay.
Michael Humer. Sorry. Michael Schumer would be an interesting one, though. Have you talked to him?
No, and I've tried. I've tried a couple times. James Corbett and what happened is I couldn't get it, so I told James Corbett to come on my show and review some of his work. So James Corbett and I had a discussion about him.
Right. Okay. So you're 25. What is, first of all, and maybe you can break this down. How do you got into this libertarian liberty sphere? And I know you talked about it on Dave a little bit, but you can go here because I have some good questions. What are you doing? Are you in college? Are you out working for? I mean, you don't have to, dox yourself necessarily, but I'm very curious because, by the way, your show I dubbed it as the podcast episode of the year. Your show with Ace going over Curtis Yarvin stuff was fantastic. And you guys are both young, and I'm very curious as to what you're doing with your life.
So with my life, I got a couple side jobs. I basically, instead of having one job that I was so obsessed with, I've diversified myself into 3. No, okay. I was kicked out of 3 colleges, one of which was a community college, just because I wasn't showing up.
Okay.
And the teacher would yell at me, well, whatever. No, I'm not in college. How I got into this? Well, it was so gradual. And I really didn't even plan on it. That's why, like, even when you watch like some of my earlier videos, I'll either have like a headset or no headset at all, because I thought that I would do like 3 interviews and then be done with this thing. But it just snowballed out of nowhere. Then I got on Ernie Hancock's show, and then Scott called me and offered me a job at the Institute. So that's the much more recent end of this. How I originally got involved was when I was really young. My dad would take me to see my grandparents in Sedona, Arizona, and we would more or less play cards at the time. Because they were old, we weren't able to walk and appreciate the beauty that is Sedona, that now when my friends and I go, we have a blast.
Right.
But I was very young and unable to appreciate it. And all I would really overhear is that there is this world outside of the school that I go to, and it consists of these really good people called Democrats and these really evil people called Republicans. And the Democrats just want to help people. It actually was perfectly summarized by Rachel Maddow the other day. This was literally the view. But she seriously said, the Republicans are trying to tear down the country and divide us all. Democrats are simply trying to govern. So that is exactly the way that I saw things. I go, how can people be so stupid? These are my neighbors, some of these Republicans. There's the good guys.
I want you to tell me, what would the Republican version of that be?
The Republican version would more or less divide people into the civilized and the barbarians. And they would say that all we're trying to do is usher in peace, security, a border wall, law and order. And the Democrats just want to teach your kids about how to have sex at age 3.
Okay.
Probably something
now
like
continue.
that.
Now we have those on the record.
The reason it's harder is because they don't control the press like the left does today. In 1200, when the church was controlling so much of the world, well, then that narrative would easily come to me.
Right.
But yeah, that's probably what I'd guess. So in that time, they were so excited that Barack Obama was going to be president. What happened was I was given the choice to go anywhere with my family. We chose Washington, D.C., so we could be there for the announcement of if the Democrats are going to pick Hillary, who was terrific, but Barack Obama managed to be better than Hillary Clinton. And in 2008, he got the nomination, either 07 or 08. I think it might have been 08. And we were there, and Washington, D.C., and we celebrated. We went to the White House, held up the paper, Obama claims nomination, and we were very happy. So what more or less pulled me into caring about this stuff is that there was a clear answer. There was the good guys and the bad guys, the Democrats versus the Republicans. The Democrats on the side of the downtrodden, simply wanting to help people by passing legislation. All this help could be ushered in, but it was the Republicans who more or less just stood there refusing to sign a bill that would have just inherently helped people. There's no cost, there's no benefits, there's just helping. There's just a thing called a solution, and no one has to bear any cost. There's no incentives that are distorted as a result of it, whatever. So it was this sort of thinking that got me initially motivated. And then the lie that, well, once he got in, the excuses started happening on day one. It was exactly like when they took the House, the Senate, and the executive this time around. It's like Trump was the root of all our problems. Okay, well, now he's gone. So this better be impressive. Let's see it. So in 2008, immediately they said, well, the country's so racist, the poor guy won't be able to get anything done. You know, I won't even be surprised if he doesn't close Gitmo or doesn't do anything, just because they're just so evil. They're just trying to undercut him. So in their philosophy, the average white person, privileged. The average male, privilege. Rich people have privilege. President of the United States of America, oppressed. Yeah,
Right.
he's actually oppressed, along with
Oprah.
Oprah.
Right.
I swear I didn't just copy. It just came to us. Michelle Obama, Simone Biles, the Olympian. Oh, terrible oppression. But the average white person has tons of privilege, and they need to apologize. So when I was told that, okay, so why isn't this Obama guy going to do what we want? Okay, so there's a guy, Glenn Beck. And this guy gets all the racists and all the bigots and all the 1%ers, and he just riles them up. And this basically is a hurdle stopping Obama from achieving this thing that he promised us we achieved.
Hang on. Do you remember back in this time, though, Rush Limbaugh said he did not want Obama's policies or him eventually to succeed. So that was really used as a and obviously and it continue on, but that just came to me that Rush Limbaugh was that was a big news thing that he wanted Obama to fail. I think is what it was. And so he was racist.
Yeah, that was he said he wanted the president to fail, and he goes, well, I want his policies to, and the left said, well, it's like being on an airplane and rooting for the pilot to fail. And then they said,
Right.
well, if the pilot's goal is to crash the plane, yes,
Right.
I want him to fail. It's amazing that that
Right.
these stories stay with us all these years. So they had said it was really guys like Glenn Beck stopping this from happening. So I go, oh my God, I have to watch this guy. I guess he just starts by talking about how evil blacks are and how women need to be stoned if they're ever caught looking at another man who isn't their husband. And I turned it on, and it's like one of the most interesting things I'd ever seen. History lessons that he gives on a blackboard citing primary sources. I'd never thought to read the books that were always talked about. Granted, I was like 12, 14 at the time. So instead of just talking loosely about a book and referencing it, he would actually have the book. He'd pick it up, he'd read it, and then the camera would zoom in, and I go, isn't that interesting? I should probably get a better idea of these concepts by reading the actual materials instead of just rumors about the materials, considering Amazon now makes books relatively cheap. This was in those earlier days. And Glenn Beck put forth a principle that there's a lot of costs and a lot of benefits to the Obamacare Affordable Care Act, but there are some benefits, but they come at these costs, and there are these negative downsides. So immediately, I started thinking of both costs and benefits in the economic sense. What later Henry Hazlitt would. Well, not later, but later I came across Henry Hazlitt, and he would say what differentiates the good economist from the bad is the ability to not just see immediate effects on one group, but long-term effects on all groups with regard to a position or policy. So it was Glenn Beck who got me in this sort of thinking. And then Glenn Beck put forth the principle that it's wrong to force someone to buy something if they wish to opt out of it. And this was in reference to it's called the individual mandate. The current status of it is like some states have it, some states don't. Tom Woods talked about it on an episode with the guy from Crowd Health, where some states have kept it, but that portion's been repealed. Whatever. That was the first time I had sort of had like this line in the sand of, oh, here's a real reason that people could be against this thing. Maybe it's not that they're evil. Maybe it's not that they hate the poor. They just want people to have the option of opting out. And then I applied this to Medicare, and I said, well, isn't that also a healthcare system that people should have the right to opt out of? And well, what about Social Security? And what about the welfare state? And what about public schools? I mean, if you look at the amount of churches that get attendance in Arizona, people go 1 day a week to church, and they are very well funded. There's a lot of them. And if you want, you can go for free. You can talk to people, and you can learn a lot if you don't have a high enough income. Imagine if schools, which people attend, 5 days a week, or at least they're used to, they probably only need to go once a week like church, and they'll learn even more if it's privatized. But if people had that opportunity to voluntarily fund schools the way they voluntarily fund churches, it would be totally fine, because I have the example of churches not being run by the state and the poor having access to something like this. So why don't the teachers' unions just get the money voluntarily? Why don't they have, whatever my equivalent of a GoFundMe was back then? Why don't they raise the money like the churches do and give people options? It was this sort of thinking that eventually opened my mind to people like Ron Paul, Frederick Bastiat, Milton Friedman, and Murray Rothbard. So I just took that principle of voluntary association and extended it consistently.
Yeah. Once you find, and by the way, Glenn Beck, I'm glad you referenced him, because he's actually been a big influence on me going from the right to libertarian. He's an interesting fellow, right? There's times on there and I listen to him, I get frustrated, and only frustrated because I feel like it's the teacher, the guy that got me to the anarchist position. And it's like, dude, you sent me on this path. Now just come along with me as much as you can. But when you probably started listening to Glenn, I actually have been with Glenn since the 9/11 type of stuff when he first came on the scene. And most of his show at the time was comedy. It's hard to maybe understand when you see Glenn Beck crying a lot, but with Stu Burguiere, they used to do a lot of comedy. And as a matter of fact, just today I came across a CD that I had of him of comedy stuff, and it's good stuff. And Glenn Beck has been vilified, obviously. You moved away from him as well. What is your feelings on him now?
I wouldn't say that I moved away. I would just say that I incorporated a number of other aspects into my worldview, just as, you almost can't help but doing. By reading Karl Marx, you will incorporate new concepts into your worldview. So my only thing with Beck is it's incredible, like how close he gets to hitting the nail on the head.
Right.
It was the interview where Michael Malice was at the Blaze studio, not where he was on Malice's show. And they were talking about police brutality, or not brutality, but just the police overreach during COVID. Like, it was just shocking that the cops would enforce such blatantly immoral things. And Glenn Beck said something to the extent of, yeah, important that could delegate these rights to a security force, to a police force, but can't have any rights that you don't grant to them. And when I heard that, I go, oh, this guy is getting close. It's incredible. But then he goes on Malice's show and says, well, the reason I'm not an anarchist is I really just have a view of human nature and humanity. To which Malice goes, I agree. I'll totally grant all that, which is why I oppose state. That's where all the evil people go to, and are evil, and it gives them, the right and ability to do things they otherwise wouldn't have in a market. And Beck goes, and I get that, and I hear that, but think of how difficult it is for, a guy who's been on radio for decades to be like convinced that the state's illegitimate by, a guy like Michael Malice. That's just in such opposition to your worldview that it's like, well, this can't be right. are all these people wrong? And it's like Michael Malice. That's the guy who's right. And it's not Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, Bill O'Reilly, Roger Ailes. They all missed this. Well, if they didn't miss it, then they're bad people. What it more or less is, it is a trick that snowballs into the minds of people and gets them to just not even question. It changes their default to where they never even question this thing, that they don't even see it as a belief. They just see it as the sun rises, the grass is green, people cooperate, a state exists. Those are all just things that inherently are involved in, the human condition. So this sort of unquestioning is difficult when the first guy you see questioning it is this guy who writes Dear Reader, the joke about Kim Jong-il. It's like, can the truth be coming from this guy? But Malice has done such a great job. If you look at who appeared on the Anarchist Handbook audio section,
Right.
he's got all these people. He's got Dave Rubin, Camille Foster. He's got Tom Woods, who is Lauren Chen, the roaming millennial. He's got all these people who you wouldn't think Ron Coleman. He's bringing all these people together and saying, you know what, maybe you don't agree with the philosophy, but this guy Malice is pretty cool. So it's sort of opening them up to the realization that, an anarchist isn't necessarily someone who throws bricks into buildings, just like not every statist is Chairman Mao or Kim Jong-un or Harry Truman. Not every anarchist is some, bomb maker who hates private property. In fact, there's a whole discipline dedicated to private property about anarchism. So I think Glenn Beck's philosophy is complementary to a lot of this, even though it's difficult for someone like him to appreciate.
Yeah, I agree with that. And by the way, I mean, his opposition to Trump and bringing on libertarians during the 2016 election is kind of what pushed me over the edge, at least helped me in that direction. So I appreciate him because people, once again, they do hate on him, and that's fine. But I do appreciate the open-mindedness of being able to talk to Malice. Eric July is on there, and just different voices. Tulsi coming on, Weinstein, and all these other great thinkers in a sense that you may have a lot of disagreement with. However, with you coming into this, when you made this change, so to speak, through the Obama, and your family was inculcated by this thinking, what do they think of you now, or even during this process?
It's so mixed. It ranges from,
Or do they know?
Oh yeah. They know. I actually remember where I was. It was my Spike Cohen interview that they first came across. A woman who worked with my mom came across the interview, and she sent it to her, and then my mom sent it to my family, and then it was out. And they were actually fine with it at first. They were more surprised. So like the first time they heard about it, it was, Keith's interviewing someone running for vice president of America, because at the time he was, the candidate. So it was more. Party, so. I know, right behind second. They're third.
Well, yeah.
So yeah, at first it wasn't big, but you still get, much like it being difficult for Glenn Beck to imagine Michael Malice has the answer that the state's illegitimate. Right. People who have been around for a long time be like, really? He's the guy who, am I going to learn something from this guy? He's dropped out of 3 schools. He's quick to anger every now and then. I'm not sure this guy is going to teach me anything. But unfortunately, you just have to sort of stick with it and try to have a solid reputation, or at least ask them things that will get them thinking in the direction that, even if they don't agree with me, they at least move away from thinking you're, totally evil or totally crazy. Once you sort of take down that pillar, they sort of set their guard down and are more open-minded to your position. Because it's not like we have to convince everyone to read Lysander Spooner and embrace the philosophy.
Right.
It's that you got to get some people very dedicated, but more or less you just have to get a large amount of people comfortable and okay with leaning into the ideology. I mean, very few people are hardcore statist, where they will explicitly defend social contract theory and the divine right of politicians and all the politicians' wars, it like takes a lot for people to become Bill Crystal. The average person, sure, legitimate. If that's the flag, I'll wave. I'll say the pledge. You know, it's not, they're not mowing down people in the streets, so I'll just recognize them as legitimate. That sort of heart, you know, tugging. It's this little nudging that Cass Sunstein always talks about, that you can really pull people into your ideology with. So just getting people to not hate you and not think you're crazy is a major, major move in the right direction. And that's more or less where I am with with my family.
So maybe you've heard Dave talk about where he feels like he's able to convince people that are not close to him easier than the family and friends. And because, you know, oh, I know little Keith from, you know, growing up, he's not going to convince me. And maybe there's a mindset against that. I mean, have you found that? Have any family members been convinced? I've convinced a few, but mostly it's mostly friends rather than family, I guess.
Yeah, well, I've been at this for a few years, so yes, but a lot of family members and a lot of friends, certainly. So it's taken a while, but because I know them and I'm willing to listen.
Yeah.
In that case, I was really willing to have in-depth conversations. I begged them to let it be recorded, but at the same time, I go, well, if it's recorded, they're not going to admit they were wrong, or they're not going to
Yeah.
be humble if they know what's going live. So that's not the way to go. But whereas with other people, I'm just like, I've spent the time on the podcast. Here's a link. Goodbye. And then I have to mute their account because they asked me one more question. And people just think that they're your time. It's bizarre beyond belief. But when it comes to friends and family, yeah, I'd say at least a third out of, you know, my general association group. They were just really surprised after, I guess it was Trump, between the Trump and Obama was such a big letdown for the left, and Trump was such a big letdown for the right,
Yeah.
that they more or less came to me after I had planted seeds years ago. It's not like I had to call them. Did you just hear Trump said he wants to take the guns first and then due process second? It's like when they heard that and this belief was lost, they were then ready to lean into it. Much like Vladimir Putin's explanation of the rise of Christianity in Russia. He goes, well, after the fall of communism, people needed something to believe in, and church was a great place for them to go. So if you're there in the background and you've been supportive ideologically or even emotionally, just willing to listen to people, it makes it seem like you're more secure. If I'm willing to listen to, say, my grandma talk about something that I've heard a number of times and I've refuted a number of times, the fact that I'm willing to listen, she goes, I was expecting, like, I guess she expects me to like throw a tantrum as if she's going
Right.
to say something that I haven't read before or heard before. So when I carefully consider it and I just grab one of her premises and then throw them back at her. So when she says, you know, it's really important we take care of the poor, I go, absolutely, it's important, which is why we need to decriminalize all capitalist acts between consenting adults, because you don't want to restrict the options of the poorest people in society. The aristocracies going back 1,000 years have always had tons of options, but free markets give the poor more wiggle room than they otherwise would have. Look at the case of North Korea versus South Korea. Where would you rather be poor? So those kinds of things. That is just something that I know would work with her. And to hear, you know, someone like her and my mom say that I've been right, where they will just mention it out of nowhere. I won't even be like, wasn't I right? God damn it. They'll just be like, you know, I gotta say, you were really right about a lot of this stuff. And that's just so shocking. I just catch the lightning in a bottle and I go, thanks. I like don't even know how to respond. Like, I want to ruin this. Okay, thank you. Let's move on.
I think a
So
lot
yeah,
of it has to do with
I'd say a third.
I think a lot of that just really has to do with being consistent, right? Over because
Mm.
you get the right and I mean a dramatic change from when Trump was running, grab him by the pussy as an example, you know, and the left is suddenly all up in arms and the right's like, no big deal. And I'm like, I remember Clinton having some issues in a White House where you guys were completely opposite. So, you know, if you or me in this case, consistent with family and friends, I think that helps bring those kind of situations. At least they may actually reference you or they may actually talk to you, but when you have a line of consistency, I think it helps. Although it seems so I don't know, my right-wing friends, they just seem to not be embracing. You can list out policies of Obama and Trump that are just so in line with each other. And, one time it's the evil thing and next time it's okay. That's the thing with war, as an example. I did have another question for you. Let's go back to when you first started this whole process. Okay. So what made you first want to get into putting out the videos in the first place? You mentioned you had a headset on. I reviewed your show. If people go back, it's episode 3. It's just when I first started, I reviewed Keith Knight. And I got pushback because my wife said you were mean to Keith. A friend said you were mean to Keith. And I'm like, you misunderstood. One, I was enthralled with your stuff, and I think you're a brilliant person. All I said was maybe the production value was missing. And what I meant by the production, I was thoroughly impressed that you would just fire up this camera, you'd have someone on, and it was a completely like a Michael Humer, as an example, comes on, and I always wondered what they thought they were getting into. And then there's the first question you just referenced the other in part of your commentary there about consenting adults, and it was your interview with Jonathan Newman, I think, just recently, about not criminalizing consent. And the first question you asked him was, "What is an economist?" And he's like, and he thought that was such a profound question. You have these ways that you just start the show off with, you read something and then you just pop right in. And so let's start back. Give me a breakdown of how you got into this, and then how you were connecting with these big time thinkers, and if you've got any feedback from them about their being impressed with being on your show.
Yeah, and one thing about the production value, that's intentional. If I spend any more time on this
I hear you.
than I already do, I will drive my head into the wall. And
although you've done some big videos like the Red Pill, Ultimate Red Pill, that's you combining clips. That's got to take some time.
And I got, in addition to that, coming out soon, and people are going to like that. But
is it the Ultimate Blue Pill?
There's yes, Justin Amash 2024, the Ultimate
Right.
Blue Pill. So yes, I know that I will end up resenting all this and getting too pissed off and getting burned out if I spend too much time or money on it. So production value ain't changing. Sorry, it's about as good as it's gonna get.
It's up. You've got a good mic, a good camera. I mean, its quality is coming up.
Well, thank you. So yeah, if anyone wants to take my stuff and revamp it and do whatever to it, IP's illegitimate. Take it, please. Do whatever you want. So you would ask, well, what got me into it was I read The Most Dangerous Superstition by Larkin Rose, and there wasn't a audio of each individual chapter. So to get someone to listen to, the hours and hours of the full audio book, I said, well, each of these chapters can be listened to independently. So therefore, what I should do is make a playlist of each individual chapter where I'm just reading. It's between like 2 minutes and 11 minutes is each chapter. So I just did that with a headset. And what I did was I sent it to a lot of people who I was speaking to at the time. I used to work in the Coctopus, which I thought was a great opportunity. We'd hand out copies of Frederick Bastiat's The Law, at least the department I was in. I had thousands of conversations with people, and I got paid to do it, and it was pretty fun. A lot of those Republicans are now ANCAPs, and that's really cool to have pulled those to have pulled those people over. That was probably 2014 to 2016, but so my first thing was reading each chapter of The Most Dangerous Superstition, because I go, this book is so good, that'll be my sort of contribution. Then I thought, well, I want there to be a complimentary interview to this, which really sums it all up. So maybe I'll get Larkin on the show. So I got him on. And I go, well, the one thing missing from the book is private defense and how it would really work in the real world. And that's how you can show people this is not just a philosophy. There's private arbitration agencies, there's private security all over the place. So I'm going to do one final video, and it's going to be on that. And I go, well, how about I summarize everything and do one final video? I had done 20 final videos, and then it just snowballed because I enjoyed it so much, getting to talk to your heroes, like,
Yeah.
Michael Humer, Jason Brennan, Brian Kaplan, Tom Woods invited me on his show. I then had him on my show, and he re-uploaded it onto his, and that was just so cool. Bob Murphy came on twice. Yeah, so
How are
it
you
really
getting these
just
guys?
snowballed. I'm sorry?
How are you getting these guests?
What I do is I try and get their contact and send them something that they would feel is both beneficial for the audience and beneficial for them. So they go, yeah, people want to hear me talk about, the Federal Reserve again or something like that, or taxation. But I've done that so many times before. But on top of that, if I say, well, this could be an opportunity to promote your book, and you can take clips of our discussion and you can send them to your people. So with a lot of promoters, I had said when I had like no viewers, I go, look, I don't have any subscribers on this channel, and that's what's going to catch your attention when you click on the link. But to attract students to the great work you've done in this book, whatever it is, take say Jason Brennan's When All Else Fails book. That was like one of the earlier ones. I said, well, to attract students, you could have this clip on your website so they could see what a great speaker you are. They can hear something they've never heard before, and that'll make them want to sign up for your class as opposed to anyone else's. And that's what got them to say yes when I had so few viewers. And now that I work at the Institute, now that I have a bigger following, I'm able to use numbers instead. So yeah, there's no special like sauce or anything. I just really try and build a good reputation. I wish I knew a better way because I've gotten some rejections lately, and I've been, oh, I can't believe
no.
they said no. But that's just because I'm so spoiled by all the great people who have
Right.
given me their time in the past.
Yeah, you have been spoiled, and it's been great for everyone else. What's your workflow like for bringing on someone to do a book? You mentioned, and by the way, I've watched tons of your stuff, so a little bit of fanboy here in a sense. But when you did like your interview with Tom Woods, are you letting him know? Because you then said, "Hey, I'm going to read off like 10 different people. Give me like a 2-minute synopsis of each," and you just like spitfire these. And I assumed Tom had no idea this was coming, and it was a great thing you did. But what is your workflow like when you're bringing someone on for a book? I mean, because it seems like to me, even you had Chrissy Mayer on the other day, and you're doing the Jordan Peterson thing, but it appeared to me you had done enough research into her where you knew that this is a book she had read or something. So, how much time are you preparing for each one of these, and kind of what's that workflow like?
All the time that's prepared is unorganized and done long before I ever have decided on someone. So if I pick someone like Jonathan Newman, his book takes literally 3 minutes to read because it's a kid's book, and it's big font, half a sentence on each page, and then just a quick summary in the back. What really gives me a lot of the material is having read a ton of stuff previously and using a pen to write down interesting things in all the books as you come across them. So one, you can read the book, in like 2 years just by underlining. You could just read the stuff you underlined and get a good summary of the book. And then it reminds you of things and you go, oh, I wonder what Bob Murphy thinks about this. I wonder what Jeff Dice would say about this topic in Walter Block's book, and what Walter Block would say about this Hans Hoppe quote that has really stuck with me. So it's very rare that I like have someone like Bob Murphy's coming on. Here's what I'm going to do. I've read, both of Paul Krugman's books, and then I go, I'd love to have Bob Murphy on for both of those. And that's what I did. So I had said, I read these Krugman books. They're as bad as you can imagine. I'd love to have you on for them. And that's what we arranged. So it's really doing a lot of random, dedicated research, and then thinking, who could I bring on that could really explain this stuff? Or with someone like Chrissy Meyer, it was just me saying, I saw you tweeted "scam of the century," and was that about COVID by any chance? She goes, yes. I go, perfect. I want to have you on and just give me your 3 favorite books and 3 favorite comedians. I'll have a good discussion for us. And so she had listed those books to me. Sometimes you can look up, what the person's really passionate about, and that'll give you a lot of material. But in that case, it took me asking her what are her favorites. And I had done a lot of research on Huxley, which we hardly even got into because we spent so much time on The Scam and Jordan Peterson. What I try to do, though, is rank things in order of importance, where we get the important stuff closest to the beginning, because there's a lot of podcasts out there and people will click off. So you want to give people access early to things. I sometimes will not even do an intro because I want to grab people's attention. One of my biggest complaints of the CNN and Fox News is that you could watch them for hours and not learn anything. So with my show, I want it to be like people click and they start learning. And anyone who isn't on our side can confidently click on something and say, you know what, I might not agree with him, but I'll at least learn about their position, or I'll hear something maybe that challenges me and will allow me to grow. So I really try to push that stuff up front. So even if I one time had a guy who I said, I started with the most important question. I go, well, on the off chance, they go like 30 minutes on the first question. Worst comes to worst. Well, then he's addressed the most important thing and he's gone in depth. And sure enough, he went 30 minutes on the first freaking question. And we had agreed on 30 minutes, but I just kept going till an hour because I was actually kind of pissed off. I thought it was rude because I had told him ahead of time, whatever. Him and I are good friends now. But yeah, that is more or less the amount of work that goes into it.
Now, what would you call it? You and Ace went over Curtis Yarvin stuff. I guess it was kind of not a takedown, but kind of a rebuttal, I guess it would be to him. That could not have just been you randomly. I mean, that was a lot of info that you went over specifically in his book. It was a 3-hour podcast, I think, episode. That one probably a little bit more coordinated, I imagine.
That one, yes. And that's just because Yarvin had said some things that sort of caught me off guard, as like he was really wrong about either where we as libertarians stand or where even he stands as a monarchist. And eventually they just piled up. So I just went to my history section on my computer and I looked up all of the Yarvin videos and I opened the transcripts and Controlled F for libertarianism. And I go, this guy is pretty much lying about us. And he's lying about monarchism as well. The main thing that he's doing, and the reason that I say it's something like lying, is because, one, he has ridiculous standards for the free market that could never be met and no standards for monarchy. When the free market fails, well, it doesn't work. When monarchy fails, we just need a different monarch. We just need a different type of government. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Second, he has read Murray Rothbard and Hans Hoppe and Ludwig von Mises. To read Hans Hoppe, the last 4 chapters of Democracy, the God That Failed, are just so irrefutably anarchist that while he's saying, yeah, monarchy is probably superior to democracy because of the low time preference that the monarch has, as opposed to the high time preference for property extraction that the democratic population has, that's probably an improvement. People take that and run with monarchy. So one of Yarvin's basically his biggest thing is he doesn't nail down a concise definition of monarchy. So if you look at one of the rebuttals to my video was, look at how he defines monarchy. It's much more like Liechtenstein, and it could be voluntary in many situations. Well, his examples of monarchs are Elon Musk, Alexander Hamilton, the Sulzbergers, head of the New York Times, the car manufacturers, and a restaurant, because a restaurant's basically run like a monarchy. So there's nothing to be afraid of with monarch. So he doesn't differentiate at all between the voluntary sector and the coercive sector. He then has such a vague, wide definition of monarchy that, yeah, you can always be right if you define it as Elon Musk, a restaurant owner, and a king. So it's going to be impossible to nail down that jello. It's the equivalent of me saying, I'm a flat earther. I define flat as both a desk, because that's an example of something flat. Another thing that's flat is a spherical tennis ball. Well, in that case, yes, the earth is flat according to my definition of flat, and nothing you say can more or less debunk it because I'm all over the place with my definition. So I thought that was so inexcusable for someone who's so smart and has made so many great contributions. And then his defense of China's COVID response is just terrible. It's just so inexcusable that that I really wanted to do one deep dive and then not really address it again, just because you've reached the point of diminishing return at 3.5 hours. Ace and I planned on like going an hour on that one. But yeah, in that one, if you watch the video format, I copy and pasted the transcript onto the screen so we could read the exact words and know exactly what we're looking at there. But I just think it's terrible that Yarvin, in a time when governments have had this like total unjustified overreach by any freaking metric, it's like hard for people to process Waco or invading Iraq or Yemen. But when it's like arresting parents for going out with their kids during a lockdown in all these places, in these first world countries, and Yarvin makes a priority to bash libertarians and justify big government because, well, the Apollo program worked, whatever the hell worked means. Well, the Manhattan Project worked. That was a big engineering project, and that went well. That is so unjustified and so uncool that he would be taking the time to bash us at a time when governments are just, it's like explicit fascism with big pharma, big tech, and the state merging and being on the same page with virtually everything. They all agree on whether or not you should obey the law. They have the same concept of the importance of diversity. He decides to bash libertarians in a time like this. Just terrible. And what he does is he goes on Tucker Carlson on Fox Nation, not on Fox News. He goes on Malice's show twice. He goes on Thaddeus Russell's shows twice. He came on my show. Thank you very much, Curtis. I appreciate it.
Before you took him on.
Oh, yeah. This was December of last year, 2 years ago. And he goes on those shows and will defend monarchy in the sense of there being a king who has subjects. But then in a totally obscure place that far fewer people see him on, he will define monarchy in a much more justified way that you could actually justify, like the HOA had a CEO and therefore the CEO is more or less a monarch. So that was just so unacceptable, I thought. And it sucks because I like him. And I go, well, he's not going to do my show again if he gets wind of this. And sure enough, someone told me that he had heard about it. And that's why he hasn't gotten back to me. But I don't know if that's true, but that's what an actual good, solid source.
Have you gotten any other pushback from people on that? Like, you were, and Curtis Yarvin, when you listen to him, he's a smart guy. I do have troubles. Yeah, I do have troubles, and maybe it's my own intellect, but I feel that he talks. Some people speak a lot, and they're not saying enough. They use long words, big sentences, speak on and on and on, and what they could have really condensed it down into much more easy to digest. And he's not that kind of person. With that said, have you got any pushback, or because I don't think it was, you using his own words against him and making logical arguments. So any problems other than the rumor mill?
Well, I mean, the biggest one that people sort of got behind was I wasn't using the correct definition of monarchy that Yarvin was using at the beginning. Therefore, all my other criticisms failed because I had an incorrect starting point. That was the main one. I'm trying to think. I don't think. I don't think any others. And my explanation is, if you define monarchy 20 different ways, one of them is going to work. Just as if a flat earther defines flat as both this, a solid plane where there are no bumps, and a tennis ball. If you use both of those as examples of flat, even though those contradict each other, well, then, yeah, the earth is technically flat according to that definition. So if a monarch is both a restaurant owner and a CEO and the head of the New York Times and Elon Musk and Alexander Hamilton and the head of China, well, then yes, everyone's a monarch. I'm the monarch of this house. You're the monarch of your own body. Everyone's a monarch in some situation. So because of his loose, unprecise definition, and because he doesn't think to specify monarch when he goes on Tucker Carlson, does
Yeah.
he think people have read his ebooks when he's talking to Tucker Carlson's huge audience, Michael Malice's huge audience when he's on twice, Thaddeus Russell's ginormous audience at Renegade University when he's on both times? So yeah, my criticism is he doesn't have a precise definition. So when I criticize his explanations on his biggest platforms, well, that's legitimate. If that's what
Which
he's saying when most people are watching, that's what's justified for me to criticize.
So this is where I think you get a lot of credit, not only because you're bringing up definitions. And if people watch your videos, you bring someone on, the first thing you're doing is setting out definitions, in a sense, to all these, big thinkers. And what is an economist, as an example? That's the most recent one. And I think it's great, and it's the only way to really have a great intellectual and curious conversation, in a sense, is defining where you're at before you're going down these roads. When you say monarchy on TV, everyone's just thinking King George III. They're thinking of these other things. They're not thinking of a different structure that he would have. So setting out the definitional standards that you do on your shows, I think is great. What made you think to do these kind of definitional breakdowns each time you bring someone on?
Because I really care about the efficiency of a conversation. I mean, some of my videos will be like 5 minutes long,
Yeah.
and I will put that into a podcast format. Others, like the Yarvin one, will be 3.5 hours long, or the Red Pill one, which is 5.5, because there are some things that just don't take too long to say. I have another one on strategy coming out soon. It's like 6 minutes long. And I got 30 other things I could put in here, but 6 minutes is enough for this this short lesson. So one, it's about respecting people's time. And if I'm talking about capitalism or socialism for a long period of time, and I'm not on the same page with the one person I'm speaking with, let alone all the people listening, well, then you're kind of wasting people's time and not giving them a narrow focus and a good idea of what the conversation is really about. Because people will have totally different definitions of the same words, and so often disagreements come down to the meaning of words. So if you take capitalism to mean the obsession with property accumulation, well, then I'm totally against it. I have more in common with a Christian monk than I do someone who is totally obsessed, because the monk at least talks about ideas, whereas someone who just buys products and never thinks about anything, well, then that person I'm not interested in. We don't share a big philosophy at
Yeah.
all. So if you define it as what's actually consumerism, or you define capitalism as by rule of capital, well, then we should use a different expression, maybe free market. Well, even free market, some people have a difference in what they mean by free. They go, well, only a gift economy would actually be a free market, because free means no cost, as opposed to free meaning not aggressed against by other actors within a certain area. So getting to definitions immediately allows you to see whether or not you're on the same page, and how you can at least start talking about the same thing. So people will often talk past each other, and when they say socialism, does that mean dictatorship? Well, sometimes. Well, socialism could also just mean Epicurean communes that existed like thousands of years ago, which are totally legitimate because they involve people voluntarily allocating resources. But so does a corporation. Involves people voluntarily allocating resources to more desired ends. Or when people say profit is a huge one, because only if you have an understanding would you really be able to appreciate both the socialist and Marxist and anarcho-capitalist position if you understand profit. When some people hear profit, what they associate it with is large-scale money accumulation by the powerful in society. That's something that they would have. But if you read Ludwig von Mises, all human beings do is they engage in action, and they do so to take their current set their current existence and improve it, and they engage with the scarce resource of their time and the scarce things that they have access to. They want to increase the benefit and decrease the cost. So even before money has entered the situation, Robinson Crusoe, alone on the island, is a profit seeker. He's trying to make the most with the absolute least. Let's take employees. When an employee spends 50 cents on gasoline to get to work, but makes $100 a day at work, he has profited $99.50. When customers buy things, they seek profit. They seek to improve their condition by making very impersonal exchanges with total strangers. There's nothing wrong with this. However, if you have the socialist worldview, you think profit is just something that applies to some people and it's really evil. And that's not it at all. And simply by understanding the definition and its implications, it stops your entire world from going, there's the profit seekers and then the exploited. And this is the dialectic. And then there's the men versus the women. And then there's the whites versus the blacks. All these fake dichotomies are just erased once you understand definitions and concepts and their implications. And you can actually hate legitimate evil people, the Raytheons of the world and the governments. Then your genuine difference is there's people who achieve their ends voluntarily and people who do so violently. And that's a justified definition. One of the biggest disagreements in history is this. Well, was this group the victim in the Franco-Prussian War? Was it France or was it Prussia? Today, is it the Palestinians or the Israelis? And people have to take a side emotionally so they can sort of plant their flag and have their community and have people who, have their back. But another way to differentiate is instead of saying the Jews were killed in the Holocaust, you could say it wasn't the mass genocide. It was more or less infanticide, I think is the word that was originally used. And it's not that these people were Jewish or Ukrainian or Chinese in the case of Manchuria. It's that these people were innocent. And I'm on the side of people who live their life by negotiating to achieve their ends, as opposed to people who see others as a mere means to an end, to where their consent is not something that's valid. So there is an actual definition that you can appreciate and find your identity in, rather than this evil classism or sexism or racism that the left and some on the right love so much today. So that's why definitions are important.
Okay. So you said something there that really sparked some interest in me, actually quite a few things. One of them, so my parents, unlike yours, were the complete opposite. We were growing up right wing. I remember parents, I'm 50, so I remember a lot more than you as far as back. I remember them being all worked up over Carter getting elected as an example. So from my point of view, that's where I came. Okay. So the Vietnam War was a very interesting thing to me. And once I became libertarian, there's certain little things that you kind of hold on to at the end and you finally give them up. And, the foreign intervention was probably my last vestige of trying to really kind of hold into the past there. But what was so fascinating to me, and by the way, your buddy there, Liberty Weekly, Patrick McFarland, he just did a thing about the Vietnam documentary and the Vietnam War, which actually to me, Keith Burns was a help to me. So I'll just back up here. The Vietnam War was always disturbing because to me, it was the communists against, the saviors of the world. And then I watched the documentary and I'm already getting kind of into the libertarian sphere. And there was one guy in there, he was enlisted. He was enlisted and he was one of the early ones. He gets out. He actually had gone to West Point, grew up with a right-wing family. He hated Jane Fonda. And yet he was throwing his medals over the thing with John Kerry. And it was interesting to me that I'm like, oh, he's against the war. He served in the war. He hates the battle that went on. And his point was when we came out at the end, it was no different than when we started. So, we're worried about the proliferation of the Viet Cong and the Soviets. And in the end, they won. We lost, 50,000 thousand people or whatever the number is. And nothing changed. This is inevitable if we hadn't gone to war anyway. I start to see a different perspective of the Vietnam War. And then I find Murray Rothbard and all that. With that, what I'm saying is, you came into this kind of, you talk about picking sides and it's, this side against this side. And that's really how that war was to me, rather than it should have been about just the evils of war. And it's not, the problem I had growing up and reading a lot of things was, the left was against the war, but they were, touting the little red book of Mao. So you have this, I'm either for the communists or I'm for not the communists. And the reality can be somewhere in the middle. I came up on the right. You started on the left. It looks like you kind of went to the Glenbeck. Are there anything you're still kind of holding, or the last vestige? And I don't know if that was kind of a right wing that you had or left wing, but what were some of the kind of those last issues that you still held on to, or if you are?
Some of the things that I would still hold on to would be more or less unconditional. So it's like, as much as you can sympathize with someone who simply just cares about the downtrodden, they see someone in a terrible position and they say, okay, what can I do to help? Those people really exist. A lot of them work in rehab centers, human resources departments. So this area of caring, you can totally sympathize with people on the, or if you take people on the right, the concept of community and needing a family, which they later extend to the state, just like the leftist extends caring to the state should care for people, that non sequitur. The right has the same, where they value the importance of community, belonging, identity, and feeling like other people have your back, increases the amount of security, thus increases the amount of satisfaction, pleasure, and confidence you have throughout your entire life. So there's still things that I am totally sympathetic with, and that allows me a starting point for which I can start having productive conversations. So I wouldn't say just because the concept of statism is just such a unjustifiable contradiction that it's not like I'm so sympathetic. It's the equivalent of me saying, well, poverty does exist, therefore Hispanics should have right to rule Asians. It's just as ridiculous as Congress should have the right to rule everyone else.
Right.
All the same shortcomings apply. There's the disincentives, and then there's just the moral issue of the entire thing. So that's not really where my sympathy lies. My sympathy lies with so much of what people believe, and realizing that it's not that they're evil, it's that they've been tricked. And therein lies where is a position where you're able to talk with people without driving yourself crazy, because it's very few people. I mean, of all the conversations I've had, I remember one specifically. I was at Charleston's in Chandler, and I was actually talking to like a totally evil person. And this is out of the thousands and thousands of conversations. I mean, this guy had an understanding of anarchy, like Lou Rockwell. He understood it backwards and forwards. And I go, well, if you have this, standard for me and my company, why not have it for this group called Congress? And he goes, because I like that group, because that's going to allow me to achieve my ends and my desires. I don't care how many people I have to kill. And I go, so if everyone resists, you'd have the right to murder everyone? He goes, yep. And I go, that's good to know. And then I just left him with, all right. So in this sort of situation, you think if you give the state tons of power, you think they're really going to have your back? So even if they totally embrace all the power you want them to, you think they're going to be calling you and say, let's call him Bob. Hey, Bob, what should we do about X, Y, and Z? If you're not useful to the most powerful person in this arena, the person who's going to be attracted to that, executive branch, well, you're not going to benefit any more than I will. So shouldn't that just scare you a little, that you might be sowing the seeds of your own destruction? And that's how that's the only way you can deal with those people. So overall, yes, I'm able to still benefit from the ideas that I get from all the people that I still disagree with, because someone always has information that you don't. And when you deal with the very rare person who you just more or less have nothing in common with, usually the reality of statism, that it only exists at the expense of other organizations. It does not have this harmonious, mutually beneficial aspect that the free market does. It only exists at the cost of coming at something else. Well, then that at least will disincentivize people or make them think twice, mainly. But that's so rare. And if that's really who we were up against, we wouldn't stand a chance. The good thing is that most people are wrong because they're tricked, not evil. So that's why I'm still able to sympathize with so many people.
Well, and I think the sympathy and coming at it. So you have some sympathies, and I believe actually you're talking about the homeless or the downtrodden and care that a lot of it, the tax policy and the welfare that's in it doesn't incentivize people to put money back into churches, Salvation Army, whatnot, because tax policy just everyone it's taken care of by the government. And I think that's an evil thing. Back to your person of speaking to the most evil person you said there in Chandler. I would almost prefer someone come right out and say what the motive is, because the people that pretend that that's not what's happening, even though that the reality, as he stated it, is everyone disagrees with you, you're going to kill everybody. That's actually I don't not necessarily implicit, but it's actually part of the mentality of those in. They just say it's for a different reason. And by the way, was it Kevin Castley that you were saying?
No, you wouldn't know the guy. Thank God you wouldn't know him.
I'm just kidding. Let's go on to a few other things real quick before we take off here. You're having a book come out. Is that correct?
Maybe.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I certainly hope so. And well, I actually shouldn't say that. The answer is yes, because I've had people write things specifically for it. So yes, absolutely. The only reason that I don't pimp it at all is because I don't know what the date is. And there's a lot that I'm learning about the editing process that at the time doesn't cross your mind. But the second you come across, you go, oh, of course that needs to be fixed. I can't believe I almost published a book with all that in there. The problem is I had told the people who took the time to write articles that it would be some time ago that the book would be published. What I've sadly done is gone back on my word for the sake of hopefully having something a little better in a couple months. So the reason I don't push it as much as I plan to is because I just don't have a date, and I feel horrible about giving the people who took time and invested into this book I hate to say it'll be another 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks later, it'll be another 3 weeks. That just feels so cheap that I'm really not talking about it until I have an exact date for the release.
And what's the concept?
The concept is going to be all the reasons that took me from a progressive to a conservative to a minarchist to an anarcho-capitalist.
Okay. And so is it similar to the anarchist handbook in a sense where other people are contributing things, or is it you? Okay.
Yeah.
See, if you'd had the book, I could have read a part of it on the top and then asked you a quick question. That's how we could have started this show. So is this going to be through the Libertarian Institute?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. What's your involvement with them?
The Cato guy tried to grab me, and especially after seeing David Bose's tweet this morning, I'm glad I didn't go with him. Even though there's so many good people there, but god damn that David Bose. He just lives to piss me off.
You know what's this is what's great about finding your channel as an example. When I right winger growing up, going through this, very involved in politics. One of my friend at the time in the 90s, this is how old I am. He gave me The Law by Frederick Bastiat, and I read that. It's super simple, and it just stuck with me. I always had a libertarian bent, but then I'm trying to find libertarian info. And before Dave shone the light on Mises, oh geez, that was great. I was looking online, and it's like David Bowe's book, Libertarian Manifesto or something comes up, and I was almost wanted to buy it, but I'm like, it's so yellow. It just seems like he's trying too hard to be libertarian. And I needed some other books. And then I find your stuff, Larkin Rose and all these things. And it's a vast world of books out there. So what is your involvement with the Libertarian Institute? I know you write some articles with them. You're obviously doing this book. Is this going to be hopefully your full-time job, or kind of what's your mindset for your career? Because you need to be prominent and utilizing your brain somewhere where everyone could benefit.
Well, thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. The reason I'm not going to make it full time is I just know that it'll drive me crazy, and then I'll end up presenting it. So I mean, that's
mental
really the
health.
only
I
thing.
appreciate that too. Way to go. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Sometimes I just need to kick back with a cigar and friends and BS about nonsense. Watch some Modern Family and Everybody Loves Raymond, and just not think about the freaking Yemen or Libya, for God's sakes. So I don't plan on making it full time. But as the Austrian would say, It's not that I won't do it. It's that I won't do it at the current price. So maybe the offer is out there.
Maybe
The offer
Cato's
is out there.
offer. What if Cato, comes up with the big Cato money? So
I was afraid to ask for an offer, so I just said no. As far as other things I plan on doing, I never would have guessed I'd be here like years ago. So
Yeah.
I have no clue. I'm just going to keep trying to produce content that takes on the cult of statism. So that's where I can be totally vague. As far as what I do for the Institute, I try to produce videos, audio, and articles and clips with other people who work there that try and communicate the concepts to people who don't agree with us. So as nice as it is for people who are already ANCAPs to say, you're making great contributions, it's so much better when I get someone who say, I never considered this, and then I came across your work. Yeah. So I recently did a video on school choice with a guy named Jason Bedrick, and look, a lot of people were unhappy about it because we didn't talk about total privatization. But what I did was I had someone who sort of agreed with us, and I reached out to his audience, and I got a little feedback, not as much as I'd like, but I got feedback from people who had never heard of libertarianism before. I had an Uber driver some time ago who had never heard the word libertarian, but because I was wearing my Libertarian Institute shirt, not this one, but a similar one, she goes, "Oh, what is that? I'm not really familiar with it." It just shocked me so much that I go, I need to have elevator pitches ready for people like this, because that was a little surprising. So what I do there, post videos and contribute to the podcast feed. But what I really want to do is be able to send people who don't agree with us my link and give them something that would intrigue them or just make something beneficial. I recently in the process of teaming up with a conservative outlet, which has 20,000 daily viewers, which is, unbelievable compared to I had 2 viewers, a few years ago. But, of course, we're not at the Hoover Institution yet. But the point is just to reach out to people and say, you guys are great on issues A, B, and C. Here's where I think you're wrong. So with the right, it'll be something like all my Thomas Sowell videos, because Thomas Sowell's just one of the most brilliant people ever. Yeah. So I'll show them that, and they'll go, maybe if this guy's able to appreciate Sowell, maybe he has other things that I can learn from. Or for Jimmy Dore, I made a video titled "A Libertarian Message to Jimmy Dore," something like that, and that was basically my plea to progressives of, you guys have a great philosophy on these 5 issues. And what I did was I based it off research done at the Journal of Libertarian Studies by Hans Hoppe like 30 years ago. So I just love the fact that I'm able to bring ideas that have been more or less gathering dust for 30 years. And people who were like 16 years old, I had a guy in Romania get a hold of me and say, this was incredible. My parents were always anti-communist, and we always tried to think, how is it that communism could grab people's attention? And your video explained it. And he was referencing the message to Jimmy Dore video. So my goal at the Institute is to provide videos that are more or less low cost. People can watch them as far as time goes. I don't have ads, and they don't cost anything monetarily. The big cost is people's time and people's hurtling to their emotional attachment to the ideas of statism. We're already facing those 2 major hurdles. So I don't want to, on top of that, add sponsors and then charge people or anything. It's big enough as it is, the ask we have here. So at the Institute, I try to provide free videos, articles, and audio and essays and quotes that will sort of help people exit this statism cult as soon as possible.
Well, I think you're doing a great job. And I think it was, you were trying to remember who you were with, just Force Mommy. Maybe I saw caught some of that. And you had made the mention that, look, your idea is just, you want to produce content for others to go there, absorb it. And by the way, that's kind of my idea too. I'm not really, trying to do anything. I have a job. I make money doing elsewhere. I'm just trying to find podcasts and people that I could spread to my friends and, to give them something to do. And then, I need to talk. So it just comes out here. Yeah. And by the way, you're reading books, which is, by the way, fantastic. I listen to a lot of books on I am riding my bike and other things. I outline and underline those things. So I'm listening to something, then I want to do it later. I've got to re-listen to it or reread it. And so, what you're doing is fantastic. Last question. What's in the bins behind you? I saw someone put that question up while you're on a show. It didn't get answered. What's in the bins, Keith?
What show was that?
It might have been
I try
Kristen
to
Meyer. And I don't know, someone on some live chat. Maybe it was Force Mommy. I happened to be listening. I looked other and someone said, "What's in the bins?" And I'm like, "Yeah, what's in the bins?"
dude, it's paper, old papers and files. It's not like I wish I could say the limbs of my enemies. It's nothing big. If I look at, oh yeah, those are old self-help books, and on that side, it's all tax information. It's all medical
Wow,
receipts.
we won't go there.
I should get a green screen.
This is maybe the last one. No, don't get a green screen. Some of the green screens are the flags behind
Thank
people.
God,
It's
I just
too much-
saved myself more money on the production value.
Right. No, that looks perfectly fine. It looks organized. I look at that and I say, Keith seems like an organized person. The green screen is fine. The flag behind often gives that feel that you're doing some sort of hostage video. So let's not go there. Kicked out or quit college? 3 of them. You said both in the time
Kicked
here.
out.
Which kicked out?
Grand Canyon University, bad grades.
Okay.
Arizona State University, bad grades. Chandler Gilbert Community College, falling asleep in class because I was a drug addict at the time.
Oh, congratulations on.
So yeah, that was 4.5 years ago. So I've been clean since then. But yeah, kicked out of all 3.
Okay, now you piqued me a little bit here. So I'm assuming, I've known people like this as well, that school is probably, you seem very smart and you're able to, obviously, I've watched enough of your videos, have this conversation here. That does not seem to be your problem. So evidently it was you were not interested either in the subject or in putting in the effort. I'm assuming that's correct.
Oh yeah. I mean, once you learn about opportunity cost, so you just see every second you're getting a little closer to death. And in that scarce time, am I going to discuss the Pythagorean theorem again? Am I going to read this boring, trivial nonsense so I could one day be as smart as the person who's a total idiot teaching the class who belongs to this psycho religion of statism? Well, no, I got tons of other books that I'm dying to read. There's Pat Buchanan's words that I have not read yet, and that devastates me. There are Thomas Sowell books that take so long to read because you have to go into like the footnotes of all this stuff. There's still things by Mises and Lou Rockwell. And there's just time that I want to relax and I don't want to read this boring nonsense. Right. So look, I gave you 12 years of my time, Mr. Government Schools, and you did a terrible job. Look, you take your car to the shop, and after 12 weeks, it's worse than it was when you brought it in. You're not going to use that company ever. So when it comes to the schooling system, I'm finished. I'm so done with the high amount of money, with the high amount of time that they take away from you. That's time I could be doing anything else. And God, what they teach is just so boring and ridiculously evil. There's one guy at ASU said he was going to kill me. I had, we were talking about, and this was a progressive, when I had said to not have double standards for the police when it comes to self-defense. Now, the implications of that are not exactly, people skipping through meadows, but at least the premise isn't that wild. And of course, he flipped out, but we ended up becoming friends later. That's just not an environment that gets people thinking any more than the Church of Scientology would be open to anti-Scientology thought. Government schools and the people those institutions have produced, they're not that interested in questioning the concept of what I should start calling government supremacy, because they're against one kind of supremacy only. But government supremacy, they're totally legitimate and they're totally okay with. So, not interested. Hate the schooling system. Waste of time and money. Produces morons. Economically illiterate. Historically illiterate. No humility. They're not open-minded. So, I hate those people so much. That's why I liked having Jason Bedrick on a few days ago. just to talk about how like the most simple ask of the teachers union is, all right, so we pay the taxes. Can we choose which school to send our kid to for hours a day, 5 days a week? And the answer is no. The answer is no. You have to pay for it. Absolutely. We'll have Kamala Harris enforce truancy laws. You'll go to jail. The kids will grow up without parents, and it will hurt the parents' job opportunities in the future. Everything's going to be worse. You don't get to choose. You will pay for it, though. And that's why, and of course, they call the private sector greedy, and that's their position. So I hate it so much that I try and provide a free educational alternative, to which people will say, well, you're biased. Well, so is every one of these motherfuckers who calls themselves a professor, just as biased as I am. Actually, I think I'm less biased because I explicitly come out and say, here's my position. Whereas they'll say, no two ways about it. The New Deal brought us out of the Depression. Asking if it caused the recession of 1937, the double dip recession within the Depression, they're not that curious about. Even when you ask them, well, government spending drastically decreased after the Second World War, wouldn't that have led to a depression instead of economic growth? The simple, most blatant things these people have never thought about because they've spent their whole life swimming with the tide. So any resistance, they flip out. No, I'm done. And I'm even done bitching about it. So I hate the university system.
Well, so me, a father of 4 kids in college and almost out of high school, that's the kind of the range there. I have tried to teach them to be skeptical of everything, not cynical necessarily. I don't know if that's helpful, but also that, college is not necessary, right? And my son's going to be a nurse, and I don't think he could just go put catheters in people, view things on YouTube. So that's a little bit different kind of instruction that you might need. So once again, I appreciate the feedback on the education, and I believe you're completely right. I think you're a poster boy of exactly this thing. I just talked to Drew Hancock a few weeks ago. Very similar attitude, smart kid, same thing. And I think it's wonderful that you guys are taking your lives in your own hands and doing what you're doing. So once again, thanks. What's next for you? For everybody else, how can they follow you, find you out there, and kind of what's the next big thing on the horizon?
They can follow me on Odyssey.com. KeithKnightDontTreadOnAnyone. I'm on YouTube, but I've been treading 2 strikes for a while, so please get me on Odyssey. I'm on the podcatchers, but the 2 great places to follow me would be Minds.com and Odyssey.com. The information to donate to either the Institute is available at LibertarianInstitute.org, or me personally, if you want me to increase my production value, like that's going to happen, or you just want to chip in and let me know you appreciate it. That stuff, that when people donate $1, it's a freaking dopamine hit. So, hey, appreciate you having me on, Tyler.
Yeah, no problem. I really appreciate it, Keith. Once again, Keith Knight, don't tread on anyone. Find him everywhere. Once again, follow him and pay him for what he does, because he's putting out a great service. Keith, appreciate it. All the best. And if you ever go back and watch my review of you on episode 3, just understand it was all out of love and there was nothing meant ill of it. Thanks, everybody. Tyler Yonke, Libertarian Podcast Review. We feature people like Keith Knight. Thanks, everybody.
I just started live streaming. Cut me some slack. I'm pretty high tech for a boomer. But anyways,
boomer.